Would please take out your second sermon outline. This one right here is apparently a very popular topic. I have had several people talking to me about this the last 10 days, and both of them hold different positions, so no matter what, I'm going to be in trouble after this one. But Colossians chapter 1, verse 10, it says that you might walk worthy of the Lord unto all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God. Now, I am confident that this is safe to say that this is the attitude of everybody in this room. We just want to walk worthy in a way that is pleasing unto God. We want to do the things that He approves of. And so it was about 10 days ago, it was the question that was asked to me. What does the Bible say about tattoos and piercings? And the question is asked out of just complete sincerity that I just want to do what the Bible says. And I can appreciate that. And so that's exactly where this lesson is coming from. And so the question is really, is this something that is permitted in the eyes of God? Now I phrase it that way for a purpose at the very beginning. Is this what is in His eyes okay, permissible? See, what I'm getting at is our preferences are all different. We have different preferences, and just because you have a preference does not make it right, most definitely does not make it binding on anybody else. I'll give you an example of this. I prefer not to eat spicy food. I hate spicy food. It makes it hard for me to breathe. It hurts going in and out, I guess. And so that doesn't make it binding on you. You may love spicy food, but that's my preference. Okay. Well, when it comes to matters like this, when we're talking about matters of what is okay in the eyes of God, when we're talking about matters of sin, talking about matters of salvation, talking about matters of godly conduct, we're not talking about preferences. And so we just want to do 1 Peter 4:11. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. Another way of saying that is you just say it how the Bible says it. And you leave out the preferences and you leave out the opinions. Okay, so the question is it a sin for the Christian to have the tattoos and to have the piercings? Well, first what I want to do is I want to look at this from the Old and the New Testament. And so in the Old Testament, I went on a hunt for things that talks about piercings, jewelry, things like that. And so the very first time that I could find it is in Genesis chapter 24, when we're talking about piercings anyway. It's talking about when Abraham sent a servant to find a bride for his son Isaac. He ends up finding Rebekah. We know the story. And the servant was praying to God, saying, God, please let me find this woman. Give me a sign that I found this woman. When she gives me and this camel a drink, let that be the woman that I'm looking for. Well, he found Rebekah, and she did that. Well, it says here, it came to pass as the camel had done drinking, that the man took a golden earring of a half shekel of weight. All right, we haven't mentioned again about this earring, 24:30. But you see that it's not really an earring. In fact, it's every version except the King James Version that calls it a nose ring. It says here that I put the earring upon her face. It is a nose ring. And I was doing some searching, however the research is, it's different. I've always thought it was the kind like this, the kind like you see with the bull, but it's actually like, a cutesy little loop is how I was reading it being done right here. It was talking about. And so all I want you to see is you have a face piercing on Rebekah. A nose piercing, it apparently is something that is fashionable back then. And when you have it done this way, where it's a gift, the nose piercing is something that shows a social status. It shows wealth, right? It's a golden ring. Well, I want to look at this next one, talking about piercings. It's not just women who had them. See, in Exodus 32, this is where they're getting the gold together to make this golden calf, because where's Moses? We ain't seen him for 40 days. And Aaron's getting all these golden earrings together, and he says you get these in the ears of your wives and of your sons and of your daughters. So I'm just showing you, it wasn't just the girls that had the piercings, it was everybody. And you go to Exodus chapter 35. This is where they are getting the stuff together to build the tabernacle, all the gold that's going to be required. And where are they getting it from? Well, they're getting it from the earrings and the tablets and the bracelets. And every man that offered an offering offered of gold unto the Lord. I'm just showing you it's not just women. See, it's my preference, to not have any piercings on me. But this was part of their culture back then. And I want you to look at this next one. That jewelry, body jewelry, piercing is actually something that's spoken about in a very positive sense. Proverbs 25:12, as an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so was the wise reprover upon an obedient ear. So I want you to see here, when the young Israelites had the piercings, men or women, they weren't viewed as rebellious punks. When the old ones had it, they weren't viewed as thugs. It's actually spoken about in a positive way. Now, there's another way that piercings are used in the Old Testament, and here it is. Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15. It says here, then his master shall bring him unto the judges, and he shall bring him to the door upon the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. You have the same thing in Deuteronomy 15. Deuteronomy is just a repeating of the law. And so what's happening here is if you have a Hebrew slave who is a slave to a fellow Hebrew, if he decides that he wants to stay with his master, and the reason why he would want to stay is because the master gave him a wife. And from that wife he's had a family. He says, I really like it here. I don't want to go. This is what you do. You pierce his ear, and it's a symbol of his servitude to that master. All right. Well, that's all that I could find really about piercings in the Old Testament. Now, we're moving on to tattoos. Now, this is the only thing that I could find about tattoos in the Old Testament. If you would, scroll down to verse 28. Leviticus 19:28. It says here, you shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you, for I am the Lord. Now, let's just stop right there. This is the only mention of tattoos I can find in the Old Testament. And so it would be very easy to pick this verse out and say, well, God don't want tattoos. You should not make any carvings on your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. Piercings are fine because I can say it's part of the culture with Israel, but I wouldn't do it with, this verse right here. Well, we've had lessons about this before, and we'll bring it up again. Lessons about context and being consistent, right? So you notice that we didn't read all this other stuff. This is a big section here in Leviticus chapter 19. What else is in this list? Well, you shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle gender with the diverse kind. Also, you shall not sow your seed, you shall not sow thy field with mingled seed. Neither shall you have on you a garment that's mingled as a mixture of linen and wool. Well, you jump down to verse 27. You shall not round the corners of your heads. That means you can't get a haircut. And you shall not mar the corners of your beard. You cannot change your beard. You got to have a nice, luscious beard. Well, let's just think about this now. Where is the consistency when we singled out verse 28? You either got to take it all or you take none of it. And if that is the case, well, I'm going to tell you, my Uncle Kirby's going right to hell. He had a field mingled with seeds. You see his garden this past summer? He had tomato plants, he had cucumber plants. It was in the same field, different rows, but the same field. I guess I'm hell-bound. I cannot grow a beard to save my life. I cut it every week. And if I did grow it out, I would look like the biggest crackhead you have ever seen, I'm sure. So I'm hell-bound. Well, see, friends, I want you to look at verse 28 again. First, I want you to look at verse 23. I didn't look at that in the line. What is the context? What's talking about right here? When you come into the land, what land? The promised land. And what is in the promised land? Well, we kind of mentioned this morning. You got folks there that you got to run out. And these folks worship pagan gods. And so I want you to look at 28. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead. What does that mean, make cuts on you for the dead? Don't you remember 1 Kings 18 or is it 19? I think it's 18, where Elijah is there on battling these 450 Baal worshipers. What were they doing the whole time? Well, they couldn't get their offering lit off. They were cutting themselves. They're cutting themselves for the dead. This is a pagan practice. And this whole thing about not having any marks printed on you, a part of the pagan practice was for them to put the tattoo on their body for their favorite deity, right? Their favorite polytheistic whole worldview. They'd get their favorite god, name, whatever, tattooed on them. And what God is simply saying, when you go over there, you do not participate in these things like they are. And I'm showing you there's a reason. It's for the dead. Now, I want to bring this out now. Galatians 5:1 through, we know this. Galatians 5:1 through 4. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. Do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. So he's talking about here circumcision. Reaching back to the old law to justify their behavior. He says, if you reach back for that circumcision, Christ profits you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised that he's a debtor to the whole law. So you reach back for that, justification from the old law. Well, you don't get the liberty just to pick one part that you want. You've got to take it all, is what it says. You got to take the animal sacrifice. You got to take the Sabbath laws. You can't just have the circumcision. Christ has become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, you are fallen from grace. We'll read Colossians 2 here in a second. The point is, and we've heard it from this passage so many times, we need to be careful when you're trying to make any kind of authoritative argument from the Old Testament. Galatians 5 is saying if you're going to reach back to the Old Testament to get your justification, you have got to take the whole thing. That's the same thing with Leviticus chapter 19. I do not know why we would single out the one about the markings and the tattoos if we're not going to keep the one about the field and the beards and everything else that goes along with that. Now you see in Colossians chapter 2 verse 14, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Well, you know that verse. The old law is finished and over with. And so I would not make any argument for any New Testament activity from the Old Testament. Does the Old Testament condemn homosexuality? Absolutely it does. But I never make that case from the Old Testament. It speaks very plainly from the New Testament about that. Romans chapter 1, 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Does the Old Testament make any kind of arguments about instrumental music? It does. You don't go back to the Old Testament to make your argument for instrumental music because the New Testament speaks very plainly. Ephesians 5:18, Colossians 3:16, sing, and nothing else. You reach back to the Old Testament to get your argument for marriage? Well, no. It does talk about marriage. If she ain't making you happy, you can just divorce her. Deuteronomy 24. But see, the New Testament's where you live and you make the arguments from the New Testament. Matthew 5, Matthew 19, 1 Corinthians 7. So what I'm saying here, we need to be careful that when we are just picking something out and not being consistent with it. Well, that leads us to the back of the paper. So the question is, what about the New Testament? Specifically, what does it say about tattoos and piercings? Nothing. In fact, when I was asked the question, what does the New Testament say about tattoos and piercings, I said, I can't think of a single thing that it says about it explicitly. But like you know how it goes when you do not have a phrase that says, thou shalt not do this or thou shalt not do that. You don't have that very specific statement. You've got to rely on principles. Like the Bible doesn't say thou shalt not gamble, but it does. Gambling does violate New Testament principles. It violates the principles of legitimate economy. It violates the principles of love. It violates the principles of allowing a heart issue to exist inside of you. So gambling violates New Testament principle. You can't do it. There's not a verse that says thou shalt not run around town naked. But there is principles about modesty that would prevent you from doing that. And so that's how you got to treat any subject that doesn't have an explicit statement about it. But first, before we get there, I want to look at this one. 1 Corinthians 6, 12 through 20. This is what me and John have mentioned the last 2 times in our classroom back there, this passage. Now I just want you to look first off at verse 19. Now I'm going to tell you, this is the part where feathers might get ruffled. But hear me out. It says here what? Know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not your own. For you are bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. This is a famous verse. And how this verse is mostly used is we say, well, the temple is the body, and you're not your own. And anything that you would ever do to harm the body is sinful and does not need to be done. And I'm not saying that you need to do things harmful to you, but that's not what I'm saying at all. See, I'll give you the example. The smoking cigarettes is sinful because it says here that your body's not your own. You need to glorify God in your body. And so smoking hurts the body, and so smoking is sin. Okay. Well, I've never used that argument ever have I used that argument from this passage. But I will say, everyone knows that smoking is harmful to their body. But a person who's going to continue smoking anyway, what is their problem? They know it hurts them, but they're going to keep doing it anyway. Well, that goes to what we talked about last week. They're addicted to it. They say, yes, it hurts me, but I'm going to do it anyway because I like it. The nicotine is flowing through my veins. They're addicted. That's the problem. They are addicted to it. Okay. Well, how the argument goes with this, tattoos and piercings harm the body, and so it's not your body that you're harming, and it is sin. And I'm saying we need to be very careful that we do not use this verse as a catch-all, because that's exactly what it'll turn into. They say, well, if it just hurts the body, well, it's sin. Well, every time you go to McDonald's, you sin. That is poison. Landon made a good point, and I didn't even think about it. You like playing football? I ain't talking about flag football, I'm talking about real football. Well, that would be a sin. You're hurting the body. You are injuring the body that doesn't need to be injured. How about medicines that you would ever take? Have you never had a medicine that has a list of side effects that's a mile long? And it says, see, these side effects, some of them include death. You ever see those commercials? Why would I ever take that? Well, that would mean that you can't take that and it not be sin. So I'm saying if you're going to use this verse as a catch-all, that's exactly what it will become. See here the context. You see the context here? Just like we did with Leviticus. Let's read it. All things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful to me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Meats for the belly, and the belly for meats, but God shall destroy both it and them. What's he talking about? Well, the body's not for fornication, but for the Lord. And the Lord is for the body. Just look at the underlines. It says here, don't you know that he says, joined to a harlot is one body, for the two shall become one flesh? He that's joined unto the Lord is one spirit. Flee fornication. We're talking about fornication. And it goes into that famous passage. See, in Corinth, they had a temple in this time that was set up to the, quote, goddess Aphrodite, who is the goddess of sex and fertility. And what would happen there at the temple of Aphrodite is that the temple prostitutes would have sex with men in order to sanctify them for the goddess Aphrodite. And so what it's talking about right here is how you do not need to be committing fornication. You had the list in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 10, and the very first one was fornication. He's just using this one as an example. Flee that fornication. And it is true. You cannot glorify God in your body while you are doing unauthorized things with the body, like fornication. And so, I'm saying, and just because Matt Smith says it does not make it the final word, but I'm saying you're going to have a hard time pinning this with tattoos and piercings. If you're going to make it a catch-all, everything falls into it. So it's true that there is no verse that says, thou shalt not have a tattoo or piercing. So what we got to do is rely on principles. Is a tattoo, is piercing sin? Not necessarily, but it can be. How can it be sin? If it violates the principles of modesty. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair and wearing of gold and putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart. It's talking about how you don't need to be focused on the outside, but you need to be focused on the inside. Now let's look at this one. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 through 10. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety. And Titus 2, 5, that we are to be discreet. We're talking about the women specifically. Be discreet. Okay. So what is modesty? Well, modesty deals with falling between two extremes. Most of the time you're talking about modesty, you're talking about dress. And the extremes are underdressed and overdressed. Modesty is what falls in between, right? See, Ancient times, the women here, 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 2, talking about the braiding of hair and stuff. It ain't talking about it's a sin to have your hair braided. What they did back in these days is the women, they would braid their hair and they would put these nice golden ornaments and stuff in their hair, right? And what it would be doing would be showing off and flaunting. It's a social status is what that is. And look how fancy my hair is. That means I belong to this particular socio-economic class. All right. Well, that's overdress. See, these passages aren't even talking about being underdressed, which is sin too, but this is really talking about being overdressed. So, being overdressed, immodest. If I was to come through those doors this morning wearing a top hat and a tuxedo looking like I'm ready to dine on the first class level of the Titanic, that's immodest, isn't it? I got my cane. Whoa, look at Matt. He sure is fancy. That's immodest. If I come in here wearing flip-flops and shorts and look like I'm ready to go to the lake, well, that is immodest too. I'm underdressed. So I want you to understand, modesty is about falling between the two extremes. Well, talking about a tattoo or a piercing, if it is something that draws attention to you, and what I mean by that, I'll tell you what draws my attention to people who have tattoos and piercings. You got face tattoos, you got full body tattoos, it's all up here on your neck, it's all these sleeves and stuff all over. You got piercings all over you, that's immodest. You have crossed the realm into immodesty when you're allowing things to draw this kind of attention to yourself. Is tattoos and piercings sin? Not necessarily, but it can be. How? By violating the principles of stewardship. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, charge them which are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Ephesians 4:28, let him that sows steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to him that gives, to him that needs. So I want you to see these verses. Number one shows us 1 Timothy 6:17 that God expects us to make income, but we can use the income on things that we do enjoy. There's nothing wrong with that. Gives us richly all things to enjoy, but the income is also to be used in such a way that it's not wasted and that it is able to provide for us and those who have the need. So how can tattoos and piercings be sinful in this? When we enter into the realm of mismanaging God's resources, basically to have body decorations is what it is. See, there's things in and of themselves that's not sin. My son has an airsoft gun. He likes playing airsoft. Well, that's not sin by itself, but I tell you what, if he's going to start blowing all of his money that he ever gets, and especially when he's an adult, on airsoft stuff, he is horribly mismanaging his funds that God has given him on a hobby. Same thing with video games, same thing with anything you can do. And I admit, I don't know how much tattoos cost. I've never had a tattoo. I'm sure they vary based off the complexities of it and all that stuff. But when you start mismanaging what God has given you for body decorations, it is sin. And someone might ask, well, Matt, how do you know what is too much? Sounds like you're the one who's drawing the line on what is too much. Well, I really don't know, I guess, how much is too much. But I will tell you one thing I do know for sure. There's only so much of you that can be tattooed. There's only so much of you that can be pierced. And when I say this, if you have violated modesty, you have probably violated the stewardship principle as well. When you have covered yourself so much in tattoos, it's going to cost a lot of money. If you have violated the modesty, you have violated the stewardship one. I can tell you that one for sure. Well, is tattoos sin? Is piercing sin? They don't have to be, but it could be. If you violate the principle of a godly influence. It talks about in Ephesians 5, verse 3 and 4, that we need to act in such a way that becomes saints. In verse 4, neither filthiness. Colossians 3, 5 through 6, mortify, that means put to death these certain things as a Christian, and one of them is uncleanness. And it says in Matthew 5, 13 through 16 that you are the salt of the earth, and that you are to be standing out from the world, and you are a light to the world, and you are to be standing out, letting your light shine. Conducting yourself as a person who wears the name of Christ. Can a tattoo and a piercing be sinful? Absolutely it can. When you're advertising vulgarity, filthiness, having these things on indecent places on your body, yeah, it's sin. Let me ask you, should a Christian girl willingly go out and get what is called a tramp stamp on her? No, that's sin. Should a Christian man go out and get a tattoo of a naked woman on his bicep? No, that is sin. That is something that is not befitting a Christian and is going to ruin a godly influence in the eyes of the world, giving him a bad name. Now you see it all the time on people. You see people tattoo Bible verses on them. There's nothing wrong with that. But I will say people who tattoo Bible verses on them, you don't need to so much focus on it being on your skin as you need to focus on it being in your heart. If that ink, that piercing is damaging to your influence as an ambassador of Christ, then yes, you have crossed the line and you have violated this principle. And so someone may ask, well, how would I ever repent of this? Well, maybe removal would be in order. I don't know. Maybe covering it up. Maybe never allowing it to ever see the light of day if that's what it takes. I tell you, I knew a guy at Honda one time. I cannot remember his name. He was a service advisor. And he had tattoos all over him. All over his, I'm talking about it was everywhere, all up his neck, all the way up here. And he hated it, absolutely hated his decisions. He wore nice long dress shirts all the time, and he was spending tons and tons and tons of money to have all these tattoos removed because he says, it's hard for me to even get a job like this. It's hard for me to have a good impression like this. People think I'm a convict dressed like this, looking like this. So I'm just saying, there's people who have these things who wish they didn't get them. And so if you're thinking about getting them, I would think very hard about getting it and what you're getting it on and where you're getting it at. So, as far as the Bible is concerned, as far as everything that I can tell, like I said, because Matt Smith said it, does that mean it is the final word? As far as the New Testament is concerned, I can find nothing where it is inherently wrong, but if you violate these principles, it would make it wrong. I hope this lesson has been helpful to you. I don't know how much trouble I'm in with how many I'm in trouble with it but I'm sure I will find out here in just a few minutes. If you're here and you're subject anyway to God's invitation, why don't you make a note together? We stand and we sing the song that's been selected.